Welcome back to CNN's breaking news coverage of President Trump's address. We just heard it to senior U.S. military officers at the Marine base at Quantico, Virginia.
Let's go live now to CNN senior reporter Daniel Dale for a fact check. All right, Daniel, what stood out to you?
There were just so many false claims, and I say that after essentially every speech, unfortunately, from President Donald Trump. But I think this is notable because of the audience. He was telling a lot of lies, saying a lot of other inaccurate things, regardless of his intentions, to the U.S.'s top military leaders. So I want you to listen to something he said about former President Joe Biden and Biden's comments about the U.S. military.
I go around bragging about that. I said, we have the strongest military anywhere in the world. I say it. You never heard Biden say that. Never heard him say anything.
Okay, so I need you to stop whatever you're doing right now and listen to what I'm about to tell you, because what just happened between Donald Trump and the top U.S. Navy Admiral is absolutely explosive. We're talking about one of the most dramatic confrontations between a sitting president and senior military leadership in modern American history during a high-profile meeting at Marine Corps University, a meeting that was supposed to be about military strategy and national security issues. A top admiral looked Donald Trump directly in the eyes and called him a disgrace to his face in front of other military leaders. And Trump's reaction? He slammed his hand on the table and stormed out of the room like a child throwing a tantrum. The stunned silence that followed tells you everything you need to know about how unprecedented this moment really was. Senior military officers, people who have dedicated their entire lives to serving this country, sat there in shock as the President of the United States fled a meeting because someone finally told him the truth. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
But you never heard him say, did you ever hear him say, we have the strongest military? He doesn't say that. I say it.
President Biden said that over and over. This took me about 5 seconds to find on Google. One sample quote from 2023. Our U.S. military, and this is not hyperbole, I've said it for the last 2 years, is the strongest military in the history of the world, not just the strongest in the world, in the history of the world. So this is just one of many such quotes from President Biden. And he made another false claim about President Biden and the military, falsely claiming at another point in the speech today that President Biden had suggested early in this term that he could get rid of the Space Force established under President Trump. Listen to that quote.
This is wild. This is absolutely wild. And I need you to understand just how significant this confrontation really is. The military operates on a chain of command: discipline, respect for authority. These are foundational principles that every service member learns from day one. For a senior admiral to directly confront the commander-in-chief, to call him a disgrace in front of other officers, that doesn't happen unless something has gone profoundly wrong. That doesn't happen unless the tensions have built up to a breaking point. That doesn't happen unless military leaders have simply had enough of what they're seeing and can no longer stay silent. And based on everything we're learning about this incident, that's exactly what happened. The admiral accused Trump of dishonoring those who serve. He called out Trump's comments and actions regarding the military. He said what apparently a lot of people in uniform have been thinking but were too afraid to say out loud. And Trump couldn't handle it. Think about what this tells us about the state of civil-military relations right now. The relationship between the president and senior military leadership is supposed to be one of mutual respect. The military advises, the president decides. There's supposed to be trust. There's supposed to be professionalism. There's supposed to be a shared commitment to the security of the nation that transcends personal politics. But what we're seeing instead is a complete breakdown of that relationship. Military leaders who have served under multiple presidents, Republican and Democratic, are openly clashing with Trump in ways we've never seen before. They're retiring early rather than carry out his orders. They're speaking out publicly about their concerns. And now, apparently, they're calling him a disgrace to his face in private meetings. The facade of normal civil-military relations has completely collapsed. And here's what really makes this story insane. This isn't an isolated incident. This confrontation at Marine Corps University is just the most dramatic example of tensions that have been building for months. We know that Admiral Alvin Halsey, a senior commander responsible for military operations in the Caribbean, recently announced his early retirement following disagreements with Trump's aggressive military actions in the region. Multiple reports indicate that there have been serious clashes between Trump's approach and what military commanders believe is strategically sound and legally appropriate. Trump has been pushing for operations that senior officers consider reckless. He's been making demands that military leaders view as dangerous, and he's been treating the armed forces like a political prop rather than an institution dedicated to national defense. The frustration has been building and building, and in that meeting at Marine Corps University, it finally exploded. The witnesses who were in the room describe a scene that's almost hard to believe. The meeting was supposed to be routine, a discussion of military priorities and national security challenges, but tensions were already high, given everything that's been happening. And when the Admiral started speaking, he didn't hold back. He directly confronted Trump about his rhetoric. He accused him of dishonoring military service members with his comments and actions. He used the word disgrace directly to the president's face. And Trump, rather than engaging with the criticism or defending his record, chose to throw a fit and leave. He slammed his hand on the table. He stormed toward the door, and he left behind a room full of military leaders, sitting in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. So today, we're going to break all of this down completely. We're going to look at exactly what happened in that meeting and what led up to this explosive confrontation. We're going to examine the broader pattern of tensions between Trump and military leadership that made this moment inevitable. We're going to talk about what Admiral Hosey's early retirement tells us about the state of civil-military relations. And we're going to discuss what this means for Trump's campaign and his claims to be a strong leader who supports the military. Because the reality is, the people who actually serve in uniform are increasingly fed up with him. And this confrontation proves it. Stay with me here, because this story is absolutely insane. All right, let's get into the details of what actually happened and why this confrontation represents such a significant moment in the relationship between Trump and the military, because the headlines don't capture just how unprecedented this really is or how much it reveals about what's happening behind closed doors. First, you need to understand that public confrontations between senior military officers and presidents essentially never happen. The military culture emphasizes discipline and respect for civilian authority. Even when officers privately disagree with presidential decisions, and they often do, they keep those disagreements internal. They voice concerns through proper channels. They offer their best military advice, but ultimately, they follow lawful orders from the commander-in-chief, because that's how civilian control of the military works. For an admiral to directly confront a sitting president, to call him a disgrace in front of other officers, represents a complete breakdown of the normal protocols that govern civil-military relations. Something pushed this officer past the breaking point, where he felt he had no choice but to speak out directly, regardless of the consequences. The meeting at Marine Corps University was supposed to be a discussion of military and national security issues. These kinds of sessions happen regularly. Presidents meet with senior commanders to get briefings and discuss strategic priorities. They're usually pretty structured affairs with prepared presentations and formal exchanges. But according to witnesses who were in the room, this meeting went off the rails almost immediately. The tensions that had been building between Trump and military leadership came to a head in ways that shocked everyone present. The Admiral didn't mince words. He directly accused Trump of dishonoring those who serve in uniform. He called out Trump's rhetoric and actions as damaging to military morale and to the institution itself. And he used language that you almost never hear directed at a sitting president, calling him a disgrace to his face. Trump's response tells you everything about his character and leadership style. Rather than engaging with the substance of the criticism, rather than defending his record or explaining his decisions, he chose to throw a tantrum and flee. Witnesses describe him slamming his hand on the table in anger. They describe him storming toward the door without addressing what the Admiral had said. They describe stunned silence among the other military leaders present as they tried to process what had just happened. This is the commander-in-chief of the most powerful military in the world, and his response to criticism from a senior officer was to run away like a petulant child who didn't get his way. That's not strength. That's weakness. That's someone who can't handle being confronted with uncomfortable truths about his own behavior. And the criticism the Admiral level wasn't coming from nowhere. It reflects concerns that have been building across military leadership for months. Trump has a long history of making comments that military families and service members find offensive. He's reportedly disparaged wounded veterans and fallen soldiers in private conversations. He's used the military as a political prop while showing little understanding of military strategy or the sacrifices service members make. He's pushed for operations that commanders view as reckless and potentially illegal, and he's demanded personal loyalty from military leaders in ways that violate the principle that the armed forces serve the Constitution, not any individual president. The case of Admiral Alvin Hosey illustrates how bad things have gotten. Hosey was a senior commander responsible for military operations in the Caribbean, a region where Trump has been pushing aggressive anti-drug operations that have raised serious legal and strategic concerns. According to reports, Hulsey found himself in repeated conflict with the administration over these operations. He raised objections about tactics that he viewed as potentially violating international law. He pushed back against directives that he considered strategically unwise. And ultimately, rather than continue carrying out orders he found deeply problematic, he chose to retire early. A decorated admiral with decades of service to his country walked away because he couldn't reconcile his professional obligations with what the administration was demanding. This isn't normal. Admirals don't just retire early because of policy disagreements. They understand that civilian leaders make the final decisions and that military officers advise rather than dictate. But when the gap between what military professionals believe is right and what the administration demands becomes too large, when the orders cross lines that officers believe shouldn't be crossed, some of them choose to leave rather than compromise their integrity. Hulsey's retirement is a symptom of a much larger disease. The civil-military relationship under Trump is fundamentally broken. Trust has collapsed, communication has broken down, and senior officers are either retiring in protest or, as we saw at Marine Corps University, directly confronting the president in ways that were unthinkable under previous administrations. The confrontation also needs to be understood in the context of Trump's 2025 campaign. He's actively seeking another term as president, and he's been using military issues as a major campaign focus. He claims to be the candidate who supports the troops. He wraps himself in military imagery and rhetoric. He attacks his opponents as weak on defense. But the reality that's emerging from incidents like this is that the actual military leadership views him very differently. They see someone who disrespects their service. They see someone who makes reckless decisions without consulting professional military advice. They see someone who treats the armed forces as a personal political tool rather than a national institution. And increasingly, they're unwilling to stay silent about it. The political implications of this confrontation are significant. For voters who care about national security and military issues, the fact that senior admirals are calling Trump a disgrace to his face should be deeply concerning. These aren't partisan political operatives. These are career military officers who have served under multiple presidents of both parties. When they say something is wrong, it carries weight. When they risk their careers to speak out, it means something. And when they directly confront a president in terms this harsh, it suggests the problems are even worse than what the public sees. The people with the most direct knowledge of Trump's military decision-making are the ones most alarmed by it. Trump supporters will no doubt try to spin this as evidence of a deep state conspiracy against their leader. They'll claim the military is full of political actors trying to undermine a president they don't like. But that narrative doesn't hold up to scrutiny. These are officers who have served loyally under Democratic and Republican presidents alike. They didn't suddenly become political activists when Trump took office. They became alarmed because what they're seeing from this administration is genuinely alarming. The confrontation at Marine Corps University wasn't a political stunt. It was a decorated military officer finally reaching the point where he couldn't stay silent any longer about what he was witnessing. The incident also raises serious questions about military readiness and morale under Trump's leadership. When the relationship between the commander-in-chief and senior military leadership is this broken, it affects everything. Officers become reluctant to give honest advice because they fear retribution. Strategic planning becomes difficult when civilian leaders won't listen to military expertise. Morale suffers when troops see their leadership in constant conflict with the president. The dysfunction at the top ripples down through the entire institution, and ultimately, it makes the country less safe. A military that doesn't trust its commander-in-chief is a military that can't function at its best. And right now, based on everything we're seeing, that trust is completely gone. The stunned silence that witnesses describe after Trump stormed out of the meeting tells its own story. These are senior military officers, people who have seen combat and made life and death decisions. They're not easily shocked, but watching their commander-in-chief called a disgrace and then watching him flee the room rather than respond, that shocked them. It shocked them because it confirmed everything they feared about the leadership at the top. It shocked them because it showed a president who can't handle criticism and won't engage with concerns from the people who actually understand military operations. And it shocked them because they realized in that moment just how broken the civil-military relationship has become. Okay, so let's break this down into the key points you need to understand about this confrontation and why it matters so much. Because there's a lot happening here, and I want to make sure you walk away with a clear picture of the significance. Point number 1. A senior admiral called the President of the United States a disgrace to his face during an official meeting. This essentially never happens. Military culture emphasizes discipline and respect for civilian authority above almost everything else. For an admiral to directly confront the commander-in-chief in these terms represents a complete breakdown of normal civil-military relations. The officer risked his entire career to say what he felt needed to be said. That tells you how serious the concerns within military leadership have become. When decorated officers start directly confronting presidents, something has gone profoundly wrong. Point number 2. Trump's response revealed his character and leadership weakness. When confronted with harsh criticism from a senior military officer, Trump didn't engage with the substance. He didn't defend his record. He didn't explain his decisions. He slammed his hand on the table and stormed out of the room like a child who didn't get his way. This is the person who claims to be a strong leader. This is the person who says he would be tough on America's enemies, and he couldn't even handle being criticized by an admiral without throwing a tantrum and fleeing. That's not strength, that's weakness, masquerading as toughness. Real leaders engage with criticism. Real leaders can handle uncomfortable truths. Trump apparently cannot. Point number 3. This confrontation fits into a broader pattern of collapsing civil-military relations under Trump. Admiral Halsey's early retirement following disagreements over Caribbean military operations shows this isn't isolated. Multiple senior officers have clashed with the administration over what they view as reckless and potentially illegal actions. The normal channels for military officers to voice concerns have apparently broken down. Trust between civilian leadership and military professionals has collapsed, and the result is unprecedented public conflict between the president and the armed forces he commands. Point number 4. The accusations the admiral made are consistent with long-standing concerns about Trump's treatment of military service members. He accused Trump of dishonoring those who serve. This echoes reports that have emerged over years about Trump's private comments disparaging wounded veterans and fallen soldiers. It reflects concerns about Trump using the military as a political prop while showing little understanding of or respect for military culture. The admiral wasn't making up new accusations. He was voicing concerns that have been building within military circles for a long time. This confrontation just brought them into the open in the most dramatic way possible. Point number 5. This has significant implications for Trump's campaign messaging about supporting the military. Trump constantly claims to be the pro-military candidate. He wraps himself in military imagery. He attacks opponents as weak on defense. But when actual senior military officers are calling him a disgrace to his face, that narrative becomes very hard to maintain. The people with the most direct knowledge of his military decision-making are the ones most alarmed by it. Voters who care about national security and respect for military service should pay attention to what the admirals and generals actually think of Trump, not what his campaign ads claim. Point number 6. The stunned silence from other officers in the room tells its own story. These are senior military leaders who have seen and done extraordinary things in service to their country. They're not easily shocked, but watching the president called a disgrace and then watching him storm out rather than respond, that shocked them. It confirmed their worst fears about civilian leadership. It showed them a commander-in-chief who can't handle criticism and won't engage with concerns from military professionals. That moment of stunned silence represents the collective realization among military leadership that the situation is even worse than they thought. Point number 7. The dysfunction at the top affects military readiness and national security. When the relationship between the president and senior military leadership is this broken, it has real consequences. Officers become reluctant to give honest advice. Strategic planning suffers when civilian leaders won't listen to military expertise. Morale declines when troops see constant conflict between their leadership and the commander-in-chief. A military that doesn't trust its president is a military that can't function at its best. And based on everything we're seeing, that trust has completely collapsed. The confrontation at Marine Corps University isn't just a dramatic story. It represents a genuine threat to national security. Point number 8. Trump supporters will try to spin this as a deep state conspiracy, but that narrative doesn't hold up. The officers raising concerns about Trump aren't partisan political operatives. They're career military professionals who have served loyally under presidents of both parties. They didn't suddenly become political activists. They became alarmed because what they're seeing from this administration is genuinely alarming. When decorated admirals start calling the president a disgrace and retiring early rather than carry out his orders, that's not politics. That's professionals sounding the alarm about serious problems. So where does this leave us? We've got a senior admiral who called the president of the United States a disgrace to his face in front of other military leaders. We've got a president who responded by slamming the table and storming out of the room like a child. We've got other senior officers retiring early rather than carry out administration directives they view as reckless. We've got a complete breakdown of the civil-military relationship that has governed American national security for generations. We've got implications for military readiness and morale that affect the country's actual security. And we've got a campaign season where Trump claims to support the military while actual military leaders are increasingly speaking out against him. This confrontation should concern every American, regardless of political affiliation. The military is supposed to be above partisan politics. The relationship between civilian leadership and military professionals is supposed to be built on mutual respect and trust. When that breaks down, when admirals feel compelled to call presidents disgraces to their faces, something fundamental has gone wrong. The people who dedicate their lives to defending this country are telling us that something is very wrong at the top. We should listen to them. They've earned that credibility through decades of service. And what they're saying, through confrontations like this one, and through early retirements, and through increasingly public criticism, is that Donald Trump is not fit to be their commander-in-chief. The drama of this moment, the accusation, the table slam, the storming out, the stunned silence, makes for a compelling story. But the substance beneath the drama is what really matters. Senior military leadership has lost confidence in the president. The civil-military relationship is broken. National security is being compromised by dysfunction at the highest levels, and the man who claims to support the troops is being called a disgrace by the people who actually lead them. That's not something a campaign ad can fix. That's not something spin can overcome. That's reality, and it's finally becoming impossible to hide. Hit that subscribe button, because you're going to want to be here as this story continues to unfold. The confrontation at Marine Corps University is just the latest dramatic moment in an ongoing breakdown of civil-military relations. More officers are likely to speak out, more retirements are likely to come, and the gap between Trump's rhetoric about supporting the military and the reality of how military leaders view him is only going to become more obvious. The Admiral said what needed to be said. Trump showed everyone who he really is by running away, and the consequences of that broken relationship are going to affect this country for years to come. Until next time.